Tonight, federal agents have stormed a secret operation in Minneapolis linked to billions in stolen taxpayer funds.
At exactly 11:47 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation stood before a classified briefing room in Washington, D.C., and delivered 6 words that would shatter the illusion of safety across the American heartland. Minnesota has been compromised from within. Within the next 72 hours, federal agents would execute the largest coordinated counter-infiltration operation ever launched on U.S. soil against a foreign-backed narcotics and human trafficking network operating under diplomatic and political cover. The numbers alone should terrify you. Over 14 tons of heroin and fentanyl moved through Minneapolis-St. Paul in 18 months. 2.1 million fentanyl pills disguised as prescription medication flooded Middle America through what investigators now call the Somali pipeline. At least 47 federal, state, and local officials were compromised. And at the center of it all, a foreign-backed covert operation orchestrated by allies of the Maduro regime in Venezuela, working hand-in-glove with a powerful Somali organized crime syndicate that had turned Minnesota into a narcotics fortress and human trafficking hub for the entire Midwest. This is not about immigration policy. This is about a deliberate, calculated infiltration of American infrastructure by foreign operatives using diplomatic channels, nonprofit organizations, and corrupt politicians to build a drug empire on U.S. soil. And what you are about to hear goes deeper than anyone imagined. 4:32 a.m. Cedar Riverside neighborhood, Minneapolis, Minnesota. The streets are dead quiet. Fog rolls thick off the Mississippi River, swallowing the glow of scattered streetlights. The temperature sits just below freezing. No cars, no movement, just the hum of distant highways and the occasional flicker of neon signs in Somali-owned storefronts that line the avenue. Then, from 4 different directions, they come. FBI hostage rescue teams, DEA special response units, ICE enforcement and removal operations, Minneapolis SWAT in full tactical gear, Department of Homeland Security Intelligence Division, over 200 federal agents moving in coordinated silence through pre-dawn darkness like shadows given order. They hit 6 locations simultaneously: a 3-story apartment complex on the corner of Riverside Avenue, a halal grocery warehouse on the east side, a money transfer storefront in the heart of Cedar Riverside, a logistics company operating out of a converted factory near the rail yard, a residential compound in Burnsville, and a sprawling mansion in Edina that belongs to a man the neighborhood knows as a community leader and philanthropist. The breach is surgical and devastating. Flashbangs detonate in rapid succession. Doors explode inward under battering rams. Agents in black fatigues flood through hallways and stairwell, their movements precise and practiced. Shouts in English, Somali, and Spanish echo through the buildings. Suspects scramble for exits that have already been sealed. Duffel bags stuffed with cash are dropped panic. Phones are thrown out windows. One man tries to flush a brick of heroin down a toilet before an agent's boot kicks the bathroom door off its hinges. Inside the grocery warehouse, agents find something that makes even the most experienced operators pause. Hidden behind a false wall in the refrigeration unit, they discover a drug super lab. Industrial-grade pill presses stamping out fentanyl pills by the thousands. Barrels of raw synthetic opioids shipped in containers marked as cooking oil. Vacuum-sealed bricks of heroin stacked floor to ceiling. Methamphetamine stored in crates labeled as halal meat products. The estimated street value, $47 million. But that is just one location. At the logistics company, agents breach a locked office and find something far more dangerous than narcotics: encrypted servers. Steel lockboxes containing ledgers written in multiple languages, external hard drives with files labeled under code names like Operation Meridian and North Star Corridor, satellite phones with international routing chips, and a wall-mounted map of the United States with red lines connecting Minneapolis to Houston, to Miami, to Newark, to Los Angeles. One DEA analyst, crouched over a seized laptop, mutters into his radio, "We are not looking at a local operation. This is a continental network." And that is when they realize, this is not just a drug cartel. This is a state-sponsored infiltration operation. 6:18 a.m., FBI Cyber Forensics Division, Minneapolis Field Office. Inside a secure room filled with monitors and analysts wearing headsets, the digital architecture of the conspiracy begins to take shape. The encrypted servers are cracked within hours. What they reveal is a masterpiece of criminal engineering. The operation is called Project Meridian. It is a multi-layered trafficking and money laundering network designed to move narcotics, human cargo, and illicit cash across North America under the cover of legitimate businesses and nonprofit humanitarian organizations. The architects are a coalition of Venezuelan intelligence operatives loyal to the Maduro regime and a powerful Somali organized crime syndicate with roots in East Africa and deep connections in the Midwest. The financial web is staggering. Shell companies registered in Minnesota, Delaware, and Nevada. Offshore accounts routed through banks in Dubai, Nairobi, Caracas, and Istanbul. Fake nonprofit foundations claiming to provide refugee assistance and community development. Restaurant chains, trucking contractors, halal food import businesses, money transfer services that move tens of millions of dollars every month disguised as remittances to Somalia and Venezuela. But the most damaging discovery is buried in the metadata of internal communications. A name keeps appearing: Governor Elliott Harmon. Not the real governor. The villain in this story is a fictional high-ranking state official who held immense influence over Minnesota's immigration policy, refugee resettlement programs, and state contracts for transportation and logistics. His digital signature is linked to authorizations for federal grant approvals, border coordination meetings, and operational schedules that align perfectly with major drug shipments and human trafficking convoys. He did not just ignore the infiltration, he engineered it. Forensic analysts trace his encrypted communications directly to a man known in intelligence circles as the Coordinator, a former Venezuelan military officer operating out of Caracas who has been linked to narcotics trafficking, money laundering, and coordination with transnational criminal organizations across Latin America and Africa. The messages are cold and transactional. Shipment cleared through port. 12 containers marked agricultural goods. Proceed as planned. Refugee intake increased by 200. Pipeline capacity expanded. No flags. Inspection schedules modified. Window opens Thursday 0300 to 600. Convoy green. This is not corruption. This is command collusion. Governor Harmon had turned Minnesota into a strategic hub for a foreign-backed drug empire and human trafficking operation that stretched from the Horn of Africa to South America, and it had been operating under federal and state blindness for years. One FBI supervisor leans back from his monitor and says what everyone in the room is thinking: we are not dealing with a rogue politician, we are dealing with a foreign asset. And the operation has just begun. 7:45 a.m., Joint Operations Command Center, Bloomington, Minnesota. A massive digital map dominates the wall of the command center. Dozens of red markers pulse across Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, and Michigan. Each one represents a target site tied to Project Meridian. Safe houses, stash locations, money laundering fronts, human trafficking transit hubs, cartel logistics nodes. Seated around the table are representatives from the FBI, DEA, ICE, DHS, ATF, and the U.S. Marshal Service. The mission is called Operation Thunderclap. The objective: total network eradication. Over 1,000 federal agents are deployed, 73 SWAT teams, 12 helicopter units including Black Hawk surveillance aircraft, armored tactical vehicles, K-9 units trained in narcotics and explosives detection, U.S. Navy intelligence support tracking financial transactions in real time, air support provided by the Minnesota Air National Guard for aerial reconnaissance and rapid response. At exactly 8 a.m., the operation begins. Simultaneous raids are launched across 5 states. In South Minneapolis, agents storm a residential compound where fentanyl pills are being packaged in prescription bottles and labeled with fake pharmacy stickers. They seize 1.8 million pills and arrest 11 operatives, including 2 former pharmacy technicians who had been recruited to provide legitimacy to the operation. In St. Paul, a halal meat processing plant is raided. Behind the refrigeration units, agents find a hidden compartment containing 60 kilograms of heroin and encrypted communication devices used to coordinate shipments with contacts in Nairobi, Djibouti, and Mogadishu. In Burnsville, a mansion belonging to a so-called community leader is breached. Inside, agents discover a command center with surveillance monitors showing live feeds from warehouses, truck stops, and border checkpoints. They find ledgers detailing payoffs to local police, county officials, and state legislators. They find cash, mountains of it, over $9 million in U.S. currency stacked in duffel bags in a reinforced basement vault. In Milwaukee, a trucking company tied to Project Meridian is raided. Agents find false bottom trailers designed to smuggle human cargo and narcotics across state lines. Inside one trailer, they discover 12 undocumented migrants from Somalia and Venezuela, locked inside without food or water, being transported as part of a human trafficking route that feeds labor into underground networks across the Midwest. In Chicago, ICE agents raid a money transfer storefront that has been laundering drug proceeds through fake remittance transactions. The owner, a Somali national with ties to the criminal syndicate, is arrested while attempting to delete financial records from his computer. Forensic recovery reveals transaction records totaling over $200 million moved through the business in just 14 months. In Detroit, a warehouse operating as a distribution hub is stormed by DEA agents. They seize 14 tons of narcotics, including cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin. They find industrial pill presses, they find weapon, AK-47 rifle, Glock pistol, ammunition crates, and they find something that sends a chill through every agent on site: blueprints for government buildings in Minneapolis and St. Paul. By noon, the underworld has taken more damage in 6 hours than it did in the last 6 years. Over 230 arrests, 83 locations raided, $127 million in cash seized, 14 tons of narcotics taken off the streets, hundreds of weapons confiscated, and dozens of servers and hard drives now in federal custody, each one containing evidence of a conspiracy that reaches far beyond Minnesota. But the operation is not over, because the deeper agents dig, the uglier it gets. 2:34 p.m. Secure Evidence Analysis Room, FBI Minneapolis Field Office. Forensic teams are combing through seized servers, financial logs, patrol schedules, and internal communications. What they find is a betrayal that cuts to the bone. The Project Meridian network did not just infiltrate businesses and nonprofits, it infiltrated law enforcement. Over the course of the investigation, analysts identify 47 individuals in positions of authority who were compromised: local police officers, county sheriffs, border patrol liaisons, state troopers, court clerks, even 2 assistant district attorneys who had been receiving monthly payments routed through fake consulting contracts. The pattern is clear and chilling. Patrol schedules were altered to create gaps in coverage when drug convoys moved through the state. Traffic stops were avoided on specific routes during specific hours. Surveillance requests were delayed or denied. Raid intelligence was leaked hours before operations were launched. Evidence logs were falsified. Witnesses were intimidated or paid off. One internal memo recovered from a deputy police chief's seized laptop reads: "Avoid enforcement activity on I-94 corridor between 0200 and 0500 on Thursday. Maintenance scheduled." There was no maintenance. There were drug shipments. In one recorded phone call between a compromised sergeant and a cartel logistics coordinator, the sergeant is heard saying, "Your guys are clear tonight. I pulled my units off the east side. Just make sure the envelope is in my locker by Friday." The envelope. That is what they called the bribes. Agents interview honest officers who had raised red flags about the suspicious patterns, only to be reassigned, reprimanded, or quietly pushed out of their departments. One veteran officer breaks down during his statement, saying he knew something was wrong but had no idea how deep it went. "I thought I was working for the city," he says. "Turns out I was working next to people who were running protection for a foreign cartel." This was not just corruption. This was a parallel enforcement system. A second, secret police force working on behalf of a transnational criminal organization and the officials who protected it. Federal agents move quickly. Arrest warrants are executed on a deputy police chief in Minneapolis, a senior sergeant in St. Paul, a border coordination liaison in Moorhead, a court clerk in Hennepin County, and a state legislator who had been receiving campaign donations funneled through nonprofit organizations tied to the Somali syndicate and Venezuelan operatives. One FBI agent watching the arrests unfold on a monitor says grimly, "We are not just taking down a cartel. We are rebuilding a system." And then the final piece falls into place. Governor Elliott Harmon is arrested at his private residence in Wayzata at 4:16 p.m. The charges are staggering: conspiracy to traffic narcotics, money laundering, racketeering, aiding and abetting a foreign criminal organization, obstruction of justice, abuse of public office. When agents enter his home office, they find encrypted phones, falsified grant documents, and a handwritten ledger detailing payments received from shell companies tied directly to the Venezuelan intelligence network and the Somali syndicate. He does not resist. He does not speak. He simply stares at the agents as they place him in handcuffs, his face pale and blank, knowing that his empire has collapsed in less than 24 hours. But here is where it gets worse, because Project Meridian was never just about Minnesota. 8:21 p.m. DHS Intelligence Fusion Center, Washington, D.C. Intelligence analysts working around the clock have traced the network's reach far beyond the Midwest. The map now shows red lines connecting Minneapolis to Houston, Texas, where Venezuelan operatives coordinated pipeline logistics and provided safe harbor for cartel members fleeing law enforcement. To Miami, Florida, where money laundering operations routed drug proceeds through luxury real estate purchases and offshore accounts. To Newark, New Jersey, where a second Somali syndicate cell operated in coordination with Minnesota. To Los Angeles, California, where narcotics were distributed through street-level networks tied to larger Mexican cartels who acted as distribution partners. The scope is staggering. Investigators estimate that the network moved over 200 tons of narcotics into the United States over a 3-year period. Heroin from Afghanistan and Myanmar, routed through East Africa. Cocaine from Colombia and Peru, routed through Venezuela. Fentanyl precursors from China, processed in Mexican superlabs, then smuggled north through coordinated corridors that had been designed to avoid detection. Human trafficking routes followed the same infrastructure. Migrants and refugees were moved through a pipeline that stretched from the Horn of Africa to Central America, then north into the United States through Texas and Minnesota. Many were told they were being resettled legally. Many paid thousands of dollars to smugglers who promised safety and work. Instead, they were trapped in forced labor, debt bondage, and exploitation. Their documents seized, their families threatened. The financial scale is almost incomprehensible. Analysts estimate that Project Meridian generated over $900 million in revenue annually. Money that flowed back to operatives in Caracas, Mogadishu, Nairobi, and Djibouti. Money that funded additional operations, corrupted officials, and expanded the network's reach deeper into American communities. And the most chilling part? They find evidence of a final phase, a file labeled Permanent Integration Protocol. It outlines a long-term strategy to embed the network so deeply into Minnesota's political, economic, and social infrastructure that it would become nearly impossible to dismantle. The plan included expanding influence over state legislative seats, increasing control over nonprofit sector funding, establishing permanent logistics partnerships with legitimate businesses, and ensuring multi-generational loyalty through community investment and fear. The goal was not just to operate in Minnesota. The goal was to own Minnesota. One intelligence officer reviewing the document says quietly, they were not building a criminal network, they were building a shadow government. Protests erupted across the country within hours of the story breaking. In Minneapolis, thousands gathered outside the state capitol demanding accountability and transparency. In cities across America, demonstrations were held calling for stricter oversight of foreign influence operations and deeper investigation into compromised officials. The raid in Cedar Riverside that sparked national attention had resulted in the death of one suspect who opened fire on federal agents during the breach. The incident became a flashpoint, with some calling it excessive force and others calling it justified response to armed resistance. The debate raged, but beneath the noise, the facts remained. A foreign-backed criminal network had infiltrated American soil. It had corrupted officials. It had poisoned communities with fentanyl, heroin, and methamphetamine. It had trafficked human beings. And it had operated for years under the noses of agencies who were either blind, complicit, or powerless to stop it. Until now. So what does this mean? It means that power does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it simply waits in silence, grows in the shadows, and spreads through systems we assume are secure. It means that infiltration does not require an army. It requires patience, money, and ambition. It means that the cost of looking away is measured not in dollars, but in lives. In the teenager who overdosed on fentanyl pills disguised as prescription medication. In the migrant who died locked in a trailer crossing state lines. In the neighborhood that became a war zone because corrupt officials allowed it. In the officer who lost faith in the system because the system was rigged from within. This is not just a story about a cartel. This is a story about what happens when we forget that democracy is fragile and that every system, no matter how strong it seems, can be bought, bent, and broken if we are not vigilant. The FBI, DEA, ICE, and DHS did their job. They dismantled the network. They arrested the traitors. They seized the drugs and the money and the infrastructure. But the question remains, how many other networks are still operating? How many other officials are still compromised? How many other communities are still under siege? If you are still watching this, tap the like button so more people see this story. Share it. Comment expose if you believe corruption like this needs to be dragged into the light and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Because this story, while fictional and dramatized, is a warning. A warning that the enemies of freedom do not always carry flags or wear uniform. Sometimes they wear suits, sometimes they sign legislation, sometimes they smile for the cameras and shake your hand while selling your safety to the highest bidder. Operation Thunderclap was a victory, but the war is far from over. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and never assume that the people in power are working for you just because they say they are. Because as this story shows, sometimes the most dangerous threat is the one we invite inside.